You know, when you look back at history, the wars, the genocides, the totalitarian regimes, doesn't it ever feel like the usual explanations, politics or ideology, just fall flat? Well, today we're diving into a book that puts forward a radical and, frankly, a pretty terrifying alternative. It's been called the very first volume in a whole new science, Ponerology, the science of evil. And believe me, that's not just some marketing line. This work forces you to confront a deeply unsettling possibility about power and the kind of people who are drawn to it. Look, this is heavy stuff, for sure, but it has massive implications for how we see the world today. And that question right there, that's the whole ballgame. The book argues that what we call macro-social evil, evil on a huge societal scale, isn't born from bad ideas. It's more like a social disease spread by very specific kinds of people. And that is the absolute core of Ponerology. To really get this new science, you've got to understand the man behind it. A man who didn't just study this evil, he survived it. Meet Dr. Andrew Łobaczewski. And let me tell you, this guy wasn't some academic sitting in an ivory tower. No way. He was a clinical psychologist, an expert on psychopathy, whose entire life was forged in the crucible of historical tragedy. I mean, he lived through both the Nazi and the communist occupations of Poland. His laboratory, it was the world literally falling apart around him. And this timeline, man, it barely even scratches the surface. Imagine this. You're starting your studies, and your professors get rounded up and sent to concentration camps. You have to do all your groundbreaking research in total secrecy, knowing that if you're caught, you're done. He was arrested, he was tortured. At one point, he had to literally burn his own manuscript. Years of work, just moments before a secret police raid. But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing. He wasn't working alone, not at first. He was part of this secret collective of scientists scattered across Eastern Europe, all risking everything to figure this out. But then, they started disappearing, one by one. Arrested, killed, who knows? And in the end, it was just him. He was the last one left, the only one to carry their monumental and incredibly dangerous work forward. So what was this secret work? This thing that people literally died for? Well, it was the beginning of a whole new science, one born not in a lab, but out of pure survival. Ponerology, that's what he called it. See, Łobaczewski and his group, they figured out pretty quickly that our usual words, good, evil, politics, morality, they just weren't cutting it. They were useless. To really get a grip on this inhuman thing they were seeing, they needed a new language, a clinical language, one based in biology and psychopathology. This really breaks down that massive shift in thinking. On one hand, you have how most of us see evil, what he calls the natural worldview. It's emotional, right? We get angry, we judge. But he argues that that very reaction, as understandable as it is, actually blinds us. It stops us from seeing the root cause. Ponerology, on the other hand, is like a medical diagnosis. The doctor doesn't judge the virus, they identify it so they can fight it. Okay, so now we get to the core of it. How does this disease actually take hold? How does an entire society get sick? The pathogen, the virus at the center of all this, is what he calls essential psychopathy. And we have to be super clear here. We're not just talking about someone being a bad person. This is a clinical, biological condition. It's a person who is literally, neurologically, missing the hardware for things like empathy or guilt. They are wired differently from the rest of us. And when you look at the traits, it's just chilling. You've got that slick, superficial charm that can fool pretty much anyone. But it's a mask. Underneath, there's this massive ego, this grandiose sense of self. They're pathological liars, master manipulators. But the key, the absolute core of it, is that void. The place where remorse and empathy are supposed to be, it's just empty. To them, you and I aren't people. We're objects, pawns on a chessboard. So how does one sick person infect an entire country? Łobaczewski lays out this terrifyingly predictable playbook. First, some appealing idea pops up, an ideology promising to make the world better. The psychopath doesn't believe in it, of course, but they see it for what it is, a perfect tool. So they grab it, they twist it, they turn it into propaganda. And then comes the really insidious part, what he calls negative selection. Basically, anyone with a conscience, anyone who's actually talented or can think for themselves, they get purged, fired, silenced, or worse. And who fills those empty spots? Yep, more people just like them.
And the end game of this process is something he named a pathocracy. This isn't just a change in leadership. It's a total takeover of the system by a small pathological minority, offering this invaluable psychological analysis of the shadowy role clinical psychopaths play in political life. The ideology they were spouting, it becomes totally meaningless. It's just wallpaper, camouflage to hide what's really going on.
Okay, I know, that is an incredibly grim picture of how a society can be hijacked from the inside out. But here's the crucial thing. Łobaczewski didn't do all this work just to leave us feeling hopeless. The whole point was to give us a weapon, to show us a way out. He put it perfectly himself. He said the solutions we need, they're not going to be the usual ones. Not politics, not war. You can't fight a disease that way. You need something more like an antibiotic, or maybe even psychotherapy for an entire nation. You have to diagnose the illness before you can ever hope to cure it. And that, right there, is the ultimate point of his monumental achievement. This knowledge, which he literally called forbidden knowledge because of how hard regimes tried to stamp it out, it's not just for academics. It is a societal vaccine. If we can learn to spot the traits, to see the patterns of this disease taking hold, we can develop an immunity. A vaccine against tyranny. That's the goal. It changes the fight, right? It's not about left versus right anymore. It's about awareness versus manipulation. And it means every single one of us can be part of the immune system. So that leaves us with a pretty huge question. If he's right, if evil on a massive scale is really a disease, then what's our real job? Maybe it's not just about building a more just world, but a psychologically healthier one. So, what does that even look like? And where on earth do we begin?